Good morning. I'm Fred Barrett from PricewaterhouseCoopers in Mexico City, and I'm delighted to be sitting here with the director of the Center of Tax Policy and Administration of the OECD. And we're going to talk a little bit together in this interview about some of the new challenges that we're experimenting at the OECD level relating to BEPS. Good morning, Pascal Saint-Amans. Glad to have you as a speaker with me this morning and to visit with you a little bit. I'd like to just start out with a very general question. What are the new challenges? Now that we have a BEPS document with 15 action points, what do you think are the next steps in the BEPS area that we should be familiar with?
Indeed, we have an action plan, 15 measures which have been agreed by 44 countries, all the OECD, all the G20, 90% of the world economy, with a big push from developing countries to join this agreement. And this was accepted and agreed by the G20 leaders in Antalya, so big political support. The new challenge now is about implementation. Implementation. We need countries to move into that direction to ensure that there is consistent implementation, that country by country reporting is in place on time, that countries put an end to harmful tax practices, that the model tax convention and more importantly the bilateral treaties are amended so that the minimum standard to prevent treaty shopping is into force, and we have a negotiation of a multilateral instrument with more than 96, 97 countries negotiating. That represents more than 2,000 bilateral treaties which could be amended, and we need to peer review the implementation to make sure that it's consistent, it's in line with the standard, and that we have convergence among all the countries to ensure that we eliminate double non-taxation, but that we keep the principle to eliminate double taxation as well.
Thank you, Pascal. It sounds like tremendous challenges and all under your helm. I think you're going to be very busy. Could you tell me a little bit about the multilateral agreement? What are some of the challenges that you're facing with so many countries negotiating this agreement?
You know that when we launched the BEPS project, we identified some treaty measures which had to be taken. In particular, one, to put an end to treaty shopping, so that you don't interpose a third country where you just have a sham entity which will still benefit from treaty shopping. We know that there are some treaty shopping hubs in the world. Mauritius, the Netherlands, and some others are used for treaty shopping purposes. We needed to change that. We needed to update the definition of permanent establishment, and there are some treaty changes to be made to deal with hybrid mismatches to improve mutual agreement procedures. Now, once you've identified that, you may say we'll update the model tax convention. All countries agree, and then they have to renegotiate their bilateral treaties. There are 3,600 bilateral treaties in the world. So it would take, 40 years to renegotiate all that, where everybody agrees that it needs to be done. So the Action 15 of the BEPS Action Plan was about saying, why don't we try to do a multilateral instrument which will modify automatically all the existing bilateral treaties of the parties to this multilateral instrument. And in 2014, we came up with a report saying it's feasible, difficult, but feasible. And in 2015, we decided to launch the negotiation of this multilateral instrument. It has started. We have 96, 97 countries participating. We expect a bit more joining. That would cover more than 2,000 bilateral treaties. And this multilateral instrument, which will amend the bilateral treaties, should be open for signature at the end of 2016 or early 2017, which means that in 18 months' time, we will have changed many thousands of bilateral treaties instead of taking 30 years of spending a lot of resource, where everybody agrees we should have an easier mechanism. That's what we're doing.
Oh, thank you very much, Pascal. One of the issues that many of the smaller countries, emerging countries have relating to issues and problems that might arise between the taxpayer and the authority is the fact that the mutual authorities, the competent authorities that do the mutual agreements, oftentimes are strapped. They don't have enough resources, and they're often hesitant to control or to limit the number of transactions that go to MAPS. On the other hand, when you're dealing with an emerging country, the big issue for multinational companies is the court system. Sometimes the court systems are unreliable in arriving at what might be the best solution. They might have They might have lack of experience on international tax matters. And so many people will feel very inclined to engage in maps. And the issue of being able to address those and to come to a possible conclusion becomes very important. How would arbitration play a role either in the multilateral agreement instrument? And could you give me a little bit of insight into that?
Well, before jumping to arbitration, I would like to say that we must improve mutual agreement procedures. They are key. We have a globalized environment, and it's not only for emerging economies. I mean, you have some developed countries which are extremely bad at handling mutual agreement procedures. They are too long, they are not conclusive, and there are too many cases which are closed without eliminating double taxation. So we had to act, and that's why we had one action, Action 14, dealing with this. Action 14 has come up with, one, a minimum standard that all the countries have agreed to implement to improve the access to the mutual agreement procedures, the way the mutual agreement procedures are handled, and to install some monitoring, peer reviewing, and publicity of the outcome in this matter, which I think will be a game changer and will change the behavior of the competent authorities by putting them on the radar screen of the tax commissioners and the finance ministers. So that's the first element which I think is the real game changer. Then, of course, the best way to ensure that at the end of the day there is the elimination of double taxation is arbitration. But arbitration is a deterrent, not to be used, but just to make competent authorities, and before competent authorities, tax inspectors, tax auditors understand that if they push their luck too far, they will lose at the end of the day. So it's a deterrent mechanism. And we favor arbitration. The problem is that not all the countries want to go there. So we will have an optional provision for arbitration in the multilateral instrument. I hope that, dozens of countries will be signing on this arbitration provision. But we need not only arbitration, but effective arbitration. You have arbitration in Europe. There is a multilateral convention on arbitration, which is not effective. So what we want to come up with is something which will work, which will have the deterrent effect, because if the competent authorities through the map are not able to come to terms to eliminate double taxation, the arbitration commission will come, will solve the problem, which means that it should also have a behavioral change. But basically, we strongly believe in the elimination of double taxation. We need to improve the behavior of competent authorities. They need more resource by putting them on the radar screen of the decision makers. I think we'll get there with a public monitoring of what's going on there. I think we'll improve the situation. And in addition to that, we will have the arbitration as an option, and we hope that more and more countries will join this option.
Okay, great. Just a quick question on the arm's length principle. We feel as advisors and professionals specializing in transfer pricing that in many ways BEPS did not modify it except in two very important ways. One is a focus on where the value is created, and two, to make sure that there is substance where that substance needs to be. And so there is some concern with the country by country legislation that the questions are more focused towards a global formulary approach. I would like to get your feeling on the arm's length standard and how this interacts with the country by country reporting.
The arm's length principle is the principle which was decided upon back in 1928 by the League of Nations, and which has been reflected in the UN Model Tax Convention, in the OECD Model Tax Convention, in all existing bilateral treaties. And the arm's length principle is about obliging companies to price the internal transaction as if they were with independent party in similar circumstances. And this principle is not going to change. It's around. It would change if it were completely failing. And it was about failing before we did BEPS. I'm glad to hear that the small two things that you mentioned are quite fundamental. So if we realign the location of the profits with the location of the activities, with the location of the value creation, we've done the work, we've done the job, and we'll see whether it works, and we do hope that it's going to work. Now, in addition to the changes to transfer pricing, and there are some other changes. There are changes on services, there are changes on the sixth method. We've tried to make it compatible with the arm's length principle, and there is agreement between Brazil, Argentina, the US, European countries on that, and I think that's a significant progress. We've made progress in terms of simplifying the rules, trying to establish more safe harbors, and so that's a significant set of change that we've made. And in addition to that, we needed more transparency, because there is some form of asymmetry of information between the businesses, which have the global picture, and tax administration, which just see the transactions from their countries, but not from a third country to another third country. And they needed to have the broad picture. That's why we've done the country-by-country reporting to equip tax administrations with a broad picture of the planning of the company. This instrument is not designed to be used as a risk, it's designed to be used as a risk assessment tool, not as an audit tool. And this is one of the conditions to have access to this information for a tax administration. So it's not a step towards global form reapportionment, but rather a step to make sure that both on transfer pricing, but also on the use of tax treaties and all the techniques to reduce the tax burden, both at source and at residence, that we have a story which is consistent and which would show that the profits are located where the activities are generating these profits and the value creation, and that there are taxes attached to that. That's the purpose of the CBCR.
Thank you very much, Pascal. Just one more question I think would be interesting, especially from the Latin American perspective, and that is in the area of services, intercompany services that are provided from abroad. There's long been a reasonable methodology that's been applied from the context of the OECD commentaries on transfer pricing that are very, very specific in terms of allowing reasonable allocations. And again, there was in the BEPS document, there was a low value added services module or presentation within BEPS that basically referred to the fact of proving that the services were provided. A very important test, which we think as advisors and clients in the area, which was very reasonable, which said an element of proof that the service was provided is if you can establish that you would be willing to pay that arm's length amount, that amount to third parties, and that is a reasonable approach in most cases with these allocations. In many cases in Latin America, they question the validity of whether the services were in fact provided. And it's a real issue because there is no standard in terms of how much evidence you can show or how much is enough. And so this is a real concern because it's viewed almost as a flashing red light or a signal of a possible abuse, when in fact, at least in my career, the 30 years I've been in the tax business, very little times have I seen abuse with intercompany services. I've seen sloppiness, but not abuse. And so the standards are really good at helping you not be sloppy, come up with reasonable methodology, but it really is a concern to taxpayers that there is nothing that really, some standard or some guideline that will clarify, hey, look, a couple of examples may be okay, or a month's worth of examples may be okay. What are your thoughts on this issue? Because it truly is a concern for Latin American companies with intercompany.
I wouldn't limit it to Latin America. I mean, in Africa, in Asia, this has been identified as a source of concern for tax administrations, which said that they were seeing a lot of money flowing out of their countries through very simple arrangements and low value services. And that's why we've added that measure in the transfer pricing actions. But combined with the requirements for the documentation on transfer pricing, I think we should have something which is harmonized, which is simplified, and which should be fine. Now, at the end of the day, the proof of the cake is in the eating, and in that case is in the implementation by the tax administrations, and that's an issue that may arise when there will be some form of review or some form of monitoring of what's happening, and we hope that a good balance will be found there. So we'll see on the implementation side. The standard is new, so it has to be tested. You know, it was issued in November. It's to be implemented now. Together with the documentation, I hope we should find the right balance there. That was the goal at least.
Great, thank you very much, Pascal. It
Thank
was
you.
a pleasure speaking to you today. Welcome to Mexico.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.